examples of places where 16-year-old voting age has worked. Round the panel, what's your take here? Is it a fair request? Janet Wilson.
It's a thorny old issue, I think we could say. And there are many views on it, and I've done a little bit of reading up around it. There is the one view which is these people are too young, they're not mature enough, they don't have mortgages, they haven't got degrees, they can't do it, which I think is very patronising. And there is another view which says that because of the huge baby boomer bubble that we're having, young people are being unfairly treated. I think it's an issue that should be taken out of the realms of politics because it could be seen as self-serving.
That's a very good point. It's actually,
So you mean a public referendum?
Almost like a public referendum would be what I would suggest. They have done it in Scotland and Austria, but they also did a trial in Norway, which was a little. They did it in different different regions, and the regions that did vote had the 16-year-old vote, and the ones that didn't had the same levels of engagement.
Okay, all right.
Maybe because the tests, they knew it was a trial.
Your take, Selwyn? I mean, this is interesting because it's often discussed, but it's not entertained seriously. I wonder, do you think we're quick to dismiss young people? We've seen them in action in terms of the student marches. They've got quite a voice now. Is it time to really look at it?
Look, that voice has got to be heard and it's got to actually reflect in the popular vote, I do believe. So, yes, I think 16 should be actually looked at. I think the realities politically are that a government that is going to do that type of reform or embrace that type of reform is usually a second or third term government, unless there's a track record of that change coming. And I think there's huge issues of reform politically, structurally, that we need to do. If you look at MMP, in my view, and I suppose it's controversial out there, I reckon get rid of the threshold. And if a party gets whatever that percentage would be to have one person in it, will that be the threshold? If it's 1.2 or whatever the calculation would be in the New Zealand Parliament, away it goes. They can form their coalition groups in opposition. The other thing is Auckland City, I believe that is way out of kilter. STV would obviously be a favourable way to go. And secondly, the CCO situation where
council-controlled organisations.
The controlled part is almost a joke. I'm sure Rodney Hyde would kind of address that joke, but it seems an ironic kind of thing to say council-controlled organisation when the elected councillors can't get anywhere near them. So those kind of reforms, I think, is the second termer. Now, whether or not we see that manifest in our political environment or not, who knows? But I think, 16.
Okay, so you're putting your stake in the sand.
Yeah.
I think it would be, and the reason I would like it as a public referendum rather than done through the political system is it's going to favour the left, isn't it? 16 to 24-year-olds are going to be more favourable towards the left.
Well, I suppose
as a matter of course than they are
if you're looking at the issue of climate change, for example, it's an issue that affects them. It's the biggest issue of their time.
Oh, it is,
I wouldn't categorise it as the left. I would say it would go against the incumbent because the problems that exist for that generation will be labelled on that one that's sitting in the government.
Incumbency. Yeah. That's probably more correct, actually. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Oh, well, we solved that. It's very interesting stuff.
There we go.
Yeah, there you have it. Wallace have just been to Christchurch and took my children to the Margaret Mayhew playground. It was fabulous. You should check it out. Families having fun together, says Debbie.
Wow.
Sarah Manning and Janet Wilson, you've both been wonderful this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me. Thanks to Ellie Ventura. I'm Wallace Chapman. Back tomorrow from 3:45. Checkpoint next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, almost a decade and a half on, residents of the tiny beachside town of Matata are waiting to hear what they'll get for their homes after they were declared high risk due to flooding. Who's paying and what if people don't want to move? The proposed sweetener to get farmers in behind the emissions trading scheme. Deportees and their families call on Jacinda Ardern to stand up to Australia's hardline immigration policy. And we were robbed of the Cricket World Cup. Now someone's pinched the steepest street from us. Stop stealing our stuff. And the determined little blue penguins, have they gone fishing or just AWOL? Either way, they're definitely gone global. We're on Penguin Patrol.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government is seeking feedback on two proposals for how to bring the agriculture sector into the emissions trading scheme by 2025. It's released the Interim Climate Change Committee's long-awaited report, which recommends a processor levy on farmers be introduced while a fair pricing system is developed. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
The Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, says historic consensus has been reached, with farming leaders agreeing on the need to implement farm-level pricing on emissions. However, the technology to effectively measure this still needs to be developed, and there's some disagreement about what to do before 2025. The committee is recommending a blanket processor levy that would generate about $50 million a year and would be recycled back into research and development. However, the agriculture sector is offering an alternative proposal because they say this ETS early approach won't incentivise farmers to reduce emissions. From Parliament, Yvette McCullough.
The Overseas Investment Office has approved the sale of the cash-strapped Westland Milk Dairy Cooperative to a foreign buyer. Earlier this month, the West Coast Dairy Company's 350 farmer shareholders voted overwhelmingly in favour of selling to China's Yili Dairy conglomerate, which already owns Oceania Dairy in South Canterbury. Maya Burry reports.
The $588 million deal needed approval from the OIO because Yili is buying significant business assets and 5 hectares of residential land currently used for factory worker accommodation at Westland's 2 processing plants. A group of former shareholders who are owed money by the co-op and sought to be paid out before the purchase asked the OIO to delay the application, but they were told it falls outside the office's scope. The deal does still require High Court approval, with a hearing set down for Thursday. In a statement, Yili said it's hopeful the offer will be accepted so it can work towards creating a strong and secure future for one of New Zealand's most trusted brands. Ko Maya Burry tēnei.
US lawmakers have introduced a resolution condemning the President Donald Trump's tweets targeting 4 congresswomen of colour as racist. He called on the women, who are all American citizens, to go back to where they came from. 3 were born in the US and the 4th arrived as a child. Residents of a Bay of Plenty beach settlement at risk from potentially deadly debris flows will this evening hear the latest offer to buy out their properties. Matata homeowners are meeting in private with Whakatane District Council in the village, where they will be presented with a new acquisition package. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
In 2005, a torrential downpour washed boulders, logs and other debris down a flooded river, destroying 27 homes in Matata. Since then, the settlement's future has been in doubt. 2 years ago, the District Council made an indicative offer of $15 million for 34 properties, although it said it couldn't afford to pay for them alone. It's understood tonight a joint offer will be made with monies from the district and regional councils and the government. The District Council says it won't be commenting until after talking to residents. Ko Robin Martin tēnei.
A mother and son have described being stabbed in a violent dairy robbery in central Auckland last year. Geeta Patel and her son Siddhartha were both stabbed while minding their family business, Highlight Dairy in Grey Lynn, last year. Otahuhu man Ngātama Kaienua is on trial in the High Court at Auckland this week, accused of being a lookout while a teenager went into the store with a knife. Today, a family friend of the Patels, Ronak Lodhaya, described finding Siddhartha critically injured moments after the stabbing. The young man had been stabbed 6 times and spent 6 weeks in hospital recovering. Mr. Kaienua says he didn't know the teenager had a knife and was never on a plan to rob the store. The holiday rental accommodation company Batch Care is being taken to court, accused of manipulating its online reviews. The Commerce Commission says the company will appear in the Auckland District Court next month, facing 2 charges under the Fair Trading Act. It says the charges follow an investigation into the Batch Care website. The Commission says Batch Care removed negative comments from some consumer reviews before putting them online and did not publish any reviews with a rating of less than 3.5 stars. It says Batch Care's conduct was liable to mislead consumers. Repairs to part of the Picton Wharf damaged by a Blue Bridge ship docking will take 3 days. A total of 4 services departing from Picton and Wellington this afternoon have been cancelled. Port Marlborough says in the meantime, one of the Blue Bridge ferries has an alternative berth. Inter-Islander passengers aren't affected. Stranded Blue Bridge passengers have been offered a refund or a rescheduled sailing. The move to take the title of the world's steepest street from Dunedin's Baldwin Street has made businesses who capitalise on the title nervous for their futures. The title has been claimed by Fourth Penglec in Wales, with the 1,000-year-old road and the seaside resort of Hullock being officially awarded the title by Guinness World Records this morning. Businesses near Baldwin Street have told RNZ News they're concerned about what it will mean for the tourist market and Dunedin's North End. It's 5:05. The absence of 8 Crusaders may weaken the All Blacks for their Rugby Championship opener in Argentina, but the replacements have a golden opportunity to stake their claim for a permanent place, says hooker Dame Coles. The Crusaders beat Argentine side the Jaguares to win the Super Rugby title earlier this month, and the All Blacks in the side will skip the Buenos Aires test to recuperate.
They've had a busy, schedule, and I think the rest will be good for them. But we've got absolute confidence in the guys that are here can step up and do a job. And it's always good being on edge a little bit during the week. And the team over here have confidence that we can prepare well and do the best to represent that All Black jersey.
All Blacks hooker Dane Coles. Belinda Sharp will become Australian Rugby League's first top-flight female referee when she officiates the National Rugby League match between Canterbury and Brisbane at Suncorp Stadium on Thursday night. It will be the first time a woman has officiated a match in the 111 years of the professional game. And England's World Cup winning cricketers will be given dukedoms, or the Garter King of Arms, if Boris Johnson is elected Prime Minister. Johnson, who's the front-runner to replace outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May, was asked how he'd mark the team's achievements and said he'd give them the titles in recognition of their success at Lord's at the weekend. That's the news.
2 vagabond penguins.
The guy was actually trying to bite me. The film lips on my chest.
Vigilante vegans red sticker meat.
It just disturbs me that people like this think that they can come in and disrupt a lawful business in the manner that they do.
And a controversial boundary call gets sledged.
I think before yesterday, no one even knew this law existed. I mean, the umpires clearly did they?
When will it be over?
Never! Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air, online and on Facebook.
Then on 9 to noon, the Interim Climate Change Committee releases its latest report. We discuss the implications. And after 10, the best exotic marigold hotel author, Deborah Mogak, on her latest book, The Carer, and looking after our elderly. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Horowhenua, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Showers, possibly squally and thundery tomorrow. For Gisborne, rain clearing tonight, then mainly fine. Hawke's Bay, becoming fine this evening. Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Waiata Upper. Occasional showers clearing early tomorrow, but returning in the south tomorrow night. For Marlborough and Nelson, showers becoming confined to western Nelson early tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, rain or showers, squally and possibly thundery from tonight. Showers easing tomorrow afternoon and clearing from southwestland. For Canterbury, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine tonight, but a few showers about Fiordland and coastal Southland. Showers everywhere tomorrow, becoming confined to Fiordland tomorrow night. And Chatham Islands, rain developing tonight, heavy at times, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. You're with RNZ National. Indira Stewart is back at 5 a.m. with First Up, followed by Kim Hill joining Corin Dan on Morning Report. It's now 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. As we go to air tonight, residents in the tiny beachside Bay of Plenty settlement of Matata are about to learn the fate of their homes that were red zoned years after a major flooding event. Rocks, trees and mud washed through the community during huge rainfall in 2005. Residents rebuilt after explicitly being told the Whakatane Council would take steps to mitigate future flooding risks. But the council council gave up on that idea, saying the area was a high loss of life risk zone and a managed retreat was the only viable option, coupled with using the Resource Management Act to force any reluctant residents off their land. Fast forward 14 stressful years, and it's believed a buyout offer will be made to the residents, funded by the Whakatane District and Regional Councils and the government. I spoke earlier to Whakatane Mayor Tony Bon, who is playing his cards pretty close to his chest.
We've got a proposal to put forward that we've been working on for a long time. You've got to remember this council has been working on this disaster is now 14 years old, and we've got people out there that are very stressed. We've got some that are quite vocal that they will not ever move, and then you've got others that want to move actually yesterday. So there is a real cross-section of the community.
And they are very stressed, and some of them are in fact very ill. So the offer you have for them, is it a buyout of some nature?
It's along those lines. It's one thing that these people have gone through a lot of stress, as you know, and I think you've interviewed a number of them, and it's really important for us to talk to them first. And I believe that we've got to look after our ratepayers in that area. This council has been working on this for a long time. It's taken a very long time to get to this stage, and we've been had an application into central government and the regional council to be partners. So tonight we will actually have the three bodies there, so that we can actually go through what is going to happen.
But you wouldn't have those three bodies gathered together in a room with these residents if you weren't offering them some kind of buyout, which you've indicated you have. They have been offered a buyout previously. What do you think makes what you're going to offer them tonight any more attractive?
No, we've only talked about a buyout previously. We haven't actually gone through and actually offered them anything in the past. We did some work. We actually used that as an example of what could happen, and that's what we did. We talked to residents, found out what they, how many were interested in that sort of system, and so this will be the
So
first
tonight's
time
a solid offer. Tonight's a solid offer.
Tonight we will work with them, and hopefully after the meeting we'll be able to talk to you and actually tell New Zealand where we've got to.
So do you anticipate that the residents are going to be happy with what you are offering them, knowing all that you do?
I can guarantee you that some will be happy and some will be still very sad. So this has been a very stressful time for them. And I can tell you, some people, over the 14 years, some people have actually passed away. They haven't actually made it. There's been a lot of stress, and I know about it. I've met people in the street, and they've told me what their views are. So people say, oh, you can't actually pass on your stress, but I think I can actually realise what some of those people are going through. And I think our council we've come to a conclusion, hopefully, that will be something that we can stand proud by.
If you are suggesting that some people would be happy, that indicates to me that you are going to offer current market value for some of the properties. Is that a fair assumption on my part?
Well, that's something that you are assuming, and I'll be able to tell you more about that.
Yeah, the reason they were unhappy when there were previous discussions were a number of the residents felt that any valuations being offered were way below what their properties were worth. So if you think they're going to be happy, you must have changed the way you're looking at the values of their properties. Have you?
Well, no, we're going along with we've got a very good company that's been doing it. They've got a lot of experience. They had experience down in the Christchurch Red Zone, and we have to be fair on everybody, and I'm sure it doesn't matter what decision you make in this world, you'll always have people that are happy and those people that are not happy. So unfortunately, I'd love to say that we could have everybody in Aotearoa happy tonight, but I know that's something that's going to be a bit hard to do.
Okay, so what about residents who don't want to leave and refuse to leave? What's the council going to do about them?
Well, there's process, and as you know, there's already a process started about rezoning that land, and that'll carry on. That'll take a few years. They have their rights to be heard, and then a decision will be made by commissioners, and then obviously will go to the Environment Court. So that will then sit with the Regional Council, but that is a long way off at the moment.
But it's your intention to push ahead with provisions that would allow for residents who refuse to leave to be evicted, in essence?
Our council has made a decision to rezone that land, yes.
So you are progressing with moves to forcibly remove them if they don't wish to go?
No. Look,
if you zone it so the land can't be used and it's uninhabitable, that is the end result, isn't it? That they would have to move.
That could be the end result, or that could be the end result. That may be the result that they'll never be able to build, or anybody else move into that property. I'm not sure. I'm not the expert there. But one thing that I can put my hand on my heart, with all the evidence that has come to council over the years, and I've been involved with this for the last 9 years, but it's gone on longer than that there is risk to life. And if we don't take action because there's risk to life, who will be responsible if people die in that community? And that will be whoever is the elected members at the time.
Why didn't you recognise the risk when it first presented itself? Because this, as you have pointed out, is more than a decades-long issue, and these people were allowed to move back, to rebuild, to invest, and now we find ourselves in this situation. Could you, the council, have handled this better?
They could have handled it better, but at the time, all the evidence was saying that they could build a retention dam. The Prime Minister of the day was Helen Clark. She came in, she vowed, like many politicians do when there's a disaster, that we'll fix it. We had every intention of fixing it, and it wasn't till, I think, 2012 that it was the experts that were working on it said, hey, don't spend any more money on this, it's impossible. And so we had to then relook at it. Look, in that time, because there was a good...
So what, you couldn't have done this any better, or you could have? Which is it?
Well, it started before my time. I would say I'm not going to blame the previous council. I actually think that at the time, when you're on council, elected members, you do go and get advice. You go and get advice from, and they were the top engineers that were around, and we listened to the community about all the alternatives. We've looked at those, and they've all come back saying, no, they're not viable. And even today, people say, why can't we have an early warning system? I personally thought, I put my hand up and said, why can't they have an early warning system? But then you've got experts that are telling you, no, it's impossible because debris flows come so fast.
So is the government kicking into the pot?
I went public last year, and at not this year's local government conference, last year's one, and I actually indicated I wanted 80% out of the government. Well, obviously that's not the case. The Minister of Local Government, she has come back and she put a formula on the table, and we've been working with the community on that for a couple of years now, and that is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
So that's Whakatane Mayor Tony Bon, and we'll bring you any updates from the meeting during the show, and after 6 we'll speak to our reporter Andrew McRae live from Matata. A long-awaited report on how the agriculture sector will be introduced into the emissions trading scheme has been released by the Interim Climate Change Committee. Now, the committee is proposing farmers pay for their emissions and receive credit for reductions through the emission trading scheme by 2025. However, the agriculture sector is worried proposed measures in the interim won't incentivise farmers to lower their emissions. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Under the proposals, farmers would pay for their emissions at the farm level from 2025.
Climate Change Minister James Shaw says there has been a remarkable shift from the agricultural sector on the topic within the past few years.
The sector itself is now saying that farm-level emissions pricing is part of the solution to reducing New Zealand's emissions from climate change. And I don't think anybody can understate the significance of that position on behalf of the sector itself, right? So there is a level of consensus that has been reached.
But Interim Climate Change Committee Chair Dr David Prentice says there is still significant work in developing accounting and reporting systems to enable it.
In the meantime, there are no easy answers or quick wins, but we need continued action on emissions reduction if we are to meet our climate goals. So, we've proposed a staged process with an initial step over the next 5 years being to price emissions at processor level through the emissions trading scheme. And what this does is it provides policy certainty and sends clear investment signals. And importantly, this would also generate around $50 million per year that can be used to advance innovation by providing farmers with the practical information and support needed to reduce emissions.
Dairy NZ Chief Executive Tim Mako agrees with the Commission that there needs to be incentives for change. But farmers don't have the capability to do that right now. He says within the next 5 years, the sector needs to set themselves up, which the government has in the past agreed with.
But in the interim, they're suggesting that we come into this rebate system, if you like, ETS early, perhaps 2020 is what I'm reading. We're saying actually give us some time, because the bottom line is putting that kind of ETS on farmers now without having everything sorted at a farm level will amount to nothing more really than a blunt instrument, a tax.
Under the simplified processor levy option, farmers would have to pay for 5% of their total emissions. Damien O'Connor says there is an acceptance by the sector of that 5% responsibility, but the question is how that's paid and when that payment will begin.
The farmers, and I tend to support them, saw the possible dilution of signals on farm to get the change in behaviour. And so the industry's come back with a recommendation that we put money into research, develop the measurement mechanisms, and then implement at the farm level by 2025 an obligation.
Public consultation on the proposals will be open until August 13. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
It is 21 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now to Dunedin, where residents of Baldwin Street are grappling with the loss of their title of the world's steepest street. Guinness World Records this morning confirmed, wait for it, Fordyspin in the Welsh town of Harlech is 2.5% steeper than Baldwin Street. They keep coming for our stuff, don't they? Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown visited the street today to see how people are coping with the blow.
The news that a Welsh pretender had stolen Dunedin's claim to the world's steepest street has been met by everything from shock and outrage to resignation and disappointment. Ideas have been floated ranging from the plausible, such as forcing the council to build the street up to make it steeper, to the outright absurd like widespread grief counselling. Everyone knows Southerners don't grieve. But residents on Baldwin Street are mostly using denial to cope with the pain.
It's not the end of the world for me. The world go on. The cricket was worse.
Good riddance. You know, it is annoying. You know, when you come from work and you're tired and you have to hang around at the bottom of the street to wait for a busload of people to behave because they think they owe the street.
Really, it won't make much difference to me. It just so happens that I, like this wee place, and Baldwin Street was next door sort of style.
But businesses banking on the title of the world's steepest street are more readily forthcoming with their true emotions. Steep Cafe manager Sarah Ruston says she was sceptical Fordyspin was going to steal the mantle and as a result is ill prepared for the cruel news.
I think it's a wee bit sad really, because now we feel a bit stupid because we came to take down the sign.
No longer the Steep Cafe?
No longer the Steep Cafe. A little bit Steep Cafe.
And tour guide Daphne Tai, who was busy showing a busload of tourists up the street this morning, says she's not willing to face the news yet, and she won't be sharing it with tourists either.
I just don't believe it. No, that can't be. Yeah, I'm not going to tell anyone.
How interested are people in seeing the world's steepest street?
I think they're really excited. They had a full steak last night just to make sure they have enough energy to clean up.
Baldwin Street's fame has come at a price. Residents reported chaos 2 years ago as visitors blocked access to their properties and trampled through their gardens. And a public toilet was installed after visitors started using the facilities in homes and businesses. Tourists scaling Baldwin Street today told Checkpoint the loss of the title of World's Steepest Street took the shine off their achievement. But it's a curiosity worth visiting nonetheless. If it had been the world's second steepest street when you'd heard about it, would you be here this morning to have a look?
Probably not. It depends if we had anything else to do. If we had somewhere to be, we probably wouldn't have.
You want to come here because it's the steepest street in the world, and then if it's no longer the steepest street in the world...
What's drawn you to Baldwin Street?
Well, it's famous for being the steepest street in the world. I've been to the one in San Francisco, so I thought I'd compare it, and I think New Zealand has the steeper street.
And what if I told you as of 2 minutes ago, it is now officially the world's second steepest street?
Oh no!
Enterprise Dunedin's director, John Christie, says we shouldn't write off the steepness of Dunedin's streets just yet.
Hey, look, you never know. We may well see somebody else take that title in time, and it may even be somewhere in Dunedin. Who would know?
In the meantime, he doesn't think Wales has taken any of Baldwin Street's shine.
Still as steep today as it was yesterday, and we know there are a number of people that enjoy it for a whole multitude of different reasons, including visitors and locals that do go and use it for different activities.
So while Baldwin Street may have ceded the title for now, don't expect Dunedin to go down without a fight. And it's still a lot easier to say. From the home of the world's second steepest street, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Are we really going to take that lying down? If you were listening then on the radio, do go back and have a look at Timothy's piece online. You can hear him panting in the background as he makes his way up Baldwin Street. There's some great pictures too. Text us on 2101 and let us know what you think about them pinching our title. Nary a flipper, fin or feather was spotted by dock rangers at Wellington's Central train station today. Rangers are on the lookout for little blue penguins after two had to be removed twice from under a sushi store near the main railway station yesterday. They were put into a nesting box on the waterfront. Michael Kropp was out there at the crack of dawn and he's filed this report.
It's an hour before sunrise. The city's slowly getting into gear. Trains are rolling into the station. The traffic is starting to build. But the little blue penguins started their day much earlier.
They've probably gone out to sea to swim where they fish and, start the day just filling up their bellies with food, getting in prime condition for nesting.
This is Robert Ash, a senior ranger at the Department of Conservation. He helped relocate the pair to a new nesting box among the rocks on the harbour's edge last night.
I was just providing them some nesting materials so that they could make a better home there. When we put them in the box, they came out, checked out the neighbourhood, and then they went back into the box and started cooing to each other, which is a really good sign that they're comfortable and relaxed.
Korora grow up to 25 centimetres tall and weigh about 1 kilogram. At the moment, they're pairing up and looking for a good nest, and if they like it, they'll return night after night.
When they're not suitable, they'll look for another place, so hopefully we've given them enough hints that this is not a suitable place.
The response to the two penguins has so far involved several police officers, dock rangers, passers-by, the odd journo, and now international media.
Police in New Zealand have been called to a sushi bar in the capital, Wellington, to remove a number of blue penguins who may have entered through freshwater pipes attracted by the smell.
A sushi bar in the New Zealand capital, Wellington, has received the highest commendation from connoisseurs of raw fish. A brood of penguins took up residence under the eatery and established a nest.
All that's a bit of an overreaction, says one taxi driver who parks next to the sushi shop around 5 o'clock each morning.
Cops come and shining the torches and everything. That was yesterday morning. I gave this lady a new whale bag in case they come out so she could stick them in her bag, but they never come out.
He says there are easier ways to catch penguins if you're impatient.
You should have just got the fire department here and hosed them out. They won't drown because they're bloody penguins.
But Scratch, who'd stopped by on his way to work, thought it was great.
They're great things, aren't they? I mean, imagine that. What a great place Wellington's becoming. Kaka flying over, tui flying past you here, and now penguins walking up the streets.
Doc's Robert Ash says while the birds are fragile and at risk, their return around the harbour is a vote of confidence for the countless volunteer hours that go into pest trapping.
We're seeing this real rewilding of our urban spaces, and it's lovely because these birds and animals were here before us, and now they're coming back, and we're just learning new ways to live with them.
But he says there's plenty more that can be done to keep Korora safe in Wellington, where these precious natives must cross busy roads twice a day to reach the shelter of the bush.
Oamaru has a really interesting penguin area, and they've actually created special culverts that go under roads that allow penguins to cross safely under roads. If we think really carefully about how we can live with penguins and build infrastructure that's compatible with them, we can have both. We can have our roads and have our penguins.
But there aren't many roads like that in Wellington, and the City Council says they're probably too expensive and disruptive to install. In the meantime, Mr Ash urges drivers to be careful at dawn, dusk and night on coastal roads, and asks dog owners to keep their pooches under control, so that one day stories about these precious little waddlers entering our CBDs won't seem so exceptional. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Michael Crop there, nay.
And again, if you want to check out the pictures in Michael's story, it'll go up on our page and our Facebook page. You can see the little penguins being corralled into cat boxes, of all things, the indignity of it. And Mike has got in touch about Baldwin Street no longer being the steepest street in New Zealand. He says, although Dunedin no longer has the steepest street, Waka in the Catlins has the most southerly railway tunnel in the world. But no railway, he says. This might be some compensation. And this has recently been confirmed, Mike says, by the Rail Heritage Trust of New Zealand. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, why Kiwi deportees from Australia think the government needs to do more. The new study that shows the origins of anorexia are in both the mind and the body. And after 6, why environmental groups aren't thrilled about the ETS plans. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text us on 2101. You can always tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The agriculture sector says a blanket levy on emissions at a processor level won't incentivise farmers to make positive changes. The Interim Climate Change Commission wants the levy in place while a fair farm level system is developed to bring the sector into the emissions trading scheme in 2025. It says the estimated $50 million this would generate would be recycled back into research to help farmers reduce emissions. However, Dairy NZ says this ETS early approach doesn't reward farmers already doing the right thing. The Overseas Investment Office has approved the sale of the cash-strapped Westland Milk Dairy Cooperative to a foreign buyer. Earlier this month, the West Coast Dairy Company's 350 farmer shareholders voted overwhelmingly in favour of selling to China's Yili Dairy conglomerate, which already owns Oceania Dairy in South Canterbury. US lawmakers have introduced a resolution condemning the President Donald Trump's tweets targeting 4 congresswomen of colour as racist. He called on the women, who are all American citizens, to go back to where they came from. The congresswomen have accused Mr Trump of pursuing an agenda of white nationalism, and they want him impeached for violating the values of the US Constitution. Residents of a Bay of Plenty beach settlement at risk from deadly debris flows are about to hear the latest offer to buy out their properties. In 2005, a torrential downpour washed boulders, logs and other debris down a flooded river, destroying 27 homes in Matata. Since then, the town's future has been in doubt, and the Whakatane Mayor, Tony Bon, has told Checkpoint not everyone will be happy at tonight's compensation offers. He says there is a risk to life in that area. Stranded Cook Strait ferry passengers have been offered a refund or rescheduled on alternative sailings. A Blue Bridge ferry clipped its berth in Picton this morning, and since then, several sailings have been cancelled. One person has been seriously injured in South Auckland after trying to flee the police. He was the driver of a car officers tried to stop in Mangere. Police say the car sped off and crashed into a nearby traffic island and a power box, which caught on fire. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to business news now with Kim Savage. Hi, Kim. So higher fuel prices and rising rents, they are the things that have nudged inflation up a little bit?
Yes, they have. Hi, Lisa. So, of course, not great news if you have a gas guzzler and you're heading to the fuel pump and having to pay more for prices, for petrol, sorry. And that is what seems to have happened in the second quarter, the June quarter, according to the Consumer Price Index. Also contributing to that rise in inflation we've seen is rising rents too. So, of course, not fantastic news if you're already struggling to afford your rent. What it has done, though, is push the annual inflation rate up slightly from 1.5% back at the start of the year through to 1.7% in this past quarter. So why does that matter? Well, it brings it just a little tad closer to what the Reserve Bank likes to target, which is 2%, but still falling slightly short of that. So just to go through how this is actually measured, this is the Consumer Price Index, as I mentioned, and it's a basket of goods, essentially, things that you and I might buy fairly regularly, and of course petrol prices, things like that, rents, things that contribute to the cost of living, that sort of stuff, is all measured periodically to assess what that rate of change in the price is. And of course that then gives us some analysis of what inflation looks like. So what's rising here and what's falling back in the second quarter of the year? So we did see the lift in fuel prices, reflecting of course the rise in the world oil prices that we have seen. Also seeing there the costs of renting going up and building houses going up too, contributing to that rise. Was offset ever so slightly by the cheaper second-hand cars and also lower domestic airfares as well we saw there. So a few declines there within that transport sector. Economists, what they tend to do is actually take out some of these details, I guess you could call them, some of the sort of more volatile things, fuel prices, for example, and look at the core measures of inflation here and see what that's doing. It has ticked up slightly when you're looking at that core inflation, but as I mentioned, still sort of falling short of what the Reserve Bank would like to see. And what that potentially means is, or likely actually means, is that the Reserve Bank is probably going to cut the official cash rate, potentially, economists reckon, in August, as early as that. And we may in fact see further cuts later in the year. Of course, that will help to stimulate the economy.
Hey, I'm interested in this story about Batch Care. Now, this is a holiday rental booking company, but it seems it's got itself in a little bit of trouble. What's it allegedly been up to?
Yes, facing 2 charges under the Fair Trading Act laid by the Commerce Commission. So the Commerce Commission is alleging here that Batch Care misled customers by manipulating its online reviews posted by users about its accommodation services. So a bit about Batch Care. It has around 2,000 properties listed on its website, has about 150,000 customers a year. So, it's a reasonable size online service. So what the Commerce Commission did is conducted a full investigation into Batch Care, and the charges that have amounted out of that investigation relate to the period between the 1st of June 2017 and 28th of September 2018. So we're talking about a period last year. So what the Commission says happened here is that Batch Care removed negative comments from some of its customer reviews before publishing on the website, and then did not publish any reviews to which consumers had given a star rating of less than 3.5 out of 5. So essentially they'd come in and they'd interrupted that process of the consumer providing the review and it then going up on the website. What the Commission says is that Batch Care has engaged in conduct that was liable to mislead consumers by doing this. So that is where those charges have amounted to. So of course, now this is all before the courts. This case will be heard in the Auckland District Court next month. So we will, of course, see what happens here. But in the meantime, the Commerce Commission has issued a little bit of advice around this area of online reviews and what businesses need to be thinking about. So reviews, they say, must be genuine and presented in a way that does not mislead the reader about what the overall message is from the consumer who's providing that review.
Okay, let's take a quick trot around the markets.
Taking a look at the NZX top 50 fell around 15 points, just about 0.1% lower today, finishing today at 10,651. And looking at the dollar, 67.3 US cents and 95.7 Australian, 53.8 pence. Asian stocks did end the day a little bit higher there. Investors really just waiting to see some news out from the US. It's earnings season kicking off this week, so we're going to hear from the likes of Citigroup, a number of other the big financial institutions. So investors really holding out for those, and some retail sales data out of the US as well, keeping things a little bit quiet at this stage.
Thanks, Kim. Kim Savage there joining us from Wellington. Kiwis who have been kicked out of Australia under controversial deportation laws say the government here hasn't backed its strong words with actions. This comes ahead of Jacinda Ardern's visit to Australia later this week, where she's meeting with her counterpart, Scott Morrison. In the government's first year of power, senior ministers condemned the huge power the Australian government has when it comes to deporting New Zealanders. But Foreign Minister Winston Peters admitted the issue wasn't even brought up at a bilateral meeting with Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne last Friday. So has the situation changed at all for deportees since the Labour-led government took office? Logan Church has the story.
Our story starts in the passenger seat of Helen Murphy's car. She works for PARS, which is funded by Corrections to help transition offenders back into the community. We're on the road to Christchurch Airport.
Okay, we're good to go.
It's a familiar route. Helen meets Kiwis who have been deported from Australia. Some are kicked out for good reason, but others not.
We get notification of everybody and we head out to the airport, which is kind of what I'm doing at the moment. We head out there.
While we drive, here's some background. In 2014, Australia made controversial changes to its Migration Act, in particular Section 501 and 116. Under the new pass of Section 116, a foreigner can be deported if he or she, quote, is or may be a risk to the health, safety or good order of the Australian community. Under Section 501, you can be deported if you are, and again I quote, not of good character.
It might suit Aussie politics, and it seems to me that there is a venal political strain to all this. Some Aussies obviously like this, but it's not good for those people. It's certainly not consistent with any humanitarian ideals that I thought both countries once shared.
That's Justice Minister Andrew Little speaking to the ABC a year ago, condemning Australia's deportation regime. Prior to the 2017 election, the Labour Party promised to challenge Australia over its detention policy, with its deputy Kelvin Davis repeatedly lambasting National for failing to stand up to Canberra. And Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has described Australia's deportation policy as corrosive to the trans-Tasman relationship. Fast forward to today, and around 1,700 New Zealanders have now been deported from Australia, many stepping off the plane with nothing and in total shock.
And we go out to Vodafone, grab a phone and have it all set up ready for them to go, because one of the first things I like for them to do is phone home to let them know they're safe and they're being looked after. Generally they have got an itinerary saying they've got 3 to 5 nights in a motel somewhere, paid for by Immigration Australia, and they might have some money, destitute money. It can be $50 or up to $250 or nothing, depending on their circumstances.
That motel allowance doesn't last long, and getting long-term accommodation can be tricky.
Because they only come with a passport, I'm going to have to go over here, a passport of 3 months, now the real estate people have become aware that a passport of 3 months means there's something, well, they think, a little bit dodgy about them.
And that's just the practical challenges. The emotional challenges come later.
All in all, it's everything is made to make them feel that they don't have a lot of control of their life at that point.
One of the first deportees Helen picked up from the airport after the law changes was Dion Murphy, no relation. Speaking to Checkpoint, Dion is open about his criminal past in Australia.
When I was about 17, I was hanging around wrong people and stuff like that, and got done for breaking into, stealing. Then after that I got a common assault charge. Then quite a few years later I ended up with an attempted murder charge. It was from long history of domestic violence at home, and the gentleman that did it, I ended up stabbing him one night while I was intoxicated and that. So.
And you served time?
Yeah, I served 3.5 years of a 9-year sentence.
That was in the late 90s. Dion did his time and left prison in 2001. He rebuilt his life and had a family. But 14 years later, it all came crashing down. He found himself in a detention centre in Sydney, which he describes as a glorified jail. And then he was deported.
It was the 30th of July 2015. Arrived here at about 20 to 11 at night.
Did you have any preparations or any plans coming to New Zealand, or was it quite literally, here's your plane ticket, get on, goodbye?
Yeah, free plane ticket, see you later, have fun.
Since then, Dion has rebuilt his life again. He's got a new partner and says he's kept on the right side of the law. But many don't handle the transition so well. Figures released at Checkpoint this year showed more than 40% of the 1,690 deportees sent back to New Zealand since 2015 had been subsequently charged with a crime here. And even for those who do keep their noses clean, it's not an easy road. Dion can't go back and see his family.
I have 4 grandkids. Two of the grandkids I've never met, which is quite hard for me. And as well as that, like, I have my parents in Australia, brothers and sisters.
Crystal Broadalow's son is at the other end of the deportation process. He is currently in an immigration centre in Brisbane and doesn't want to be identified for fear it might harm his case. Speaking from the Gold Coast, Ms. Broadalow told us that as a kid he suffered from PTSD after seeing his best friend shot dead, his family home destroyed by a storm, and a woman being crushed by a car outside school. She says his methods for coping with this as an adult led him into trouble.
The trauma was too much for him to deal with, and he ended up smoking pot for a couple of years, and then ended up using ice to block out the trauma that he was experiencing every single day. And ice led to crime, just little things, ended up becoming bigger things like stealing.
But it got worse.
He had 6 charges against him. He had a device, I think it's called a bong or something like that, in the car, and he had a little bit of marijuana on him. He also had a handmade gun and some bullets, and he was pulled over by the police at night time. He got charged for that, and that having that weapon comes with a 12-month mandatory sentence.
Crystal makes no excuse for her son's actions and believes he should be held accountable for his crimes. But he has now served his time behind bars and was trying to improve his life, including attending counsellor sessions and group therapy. But he is now being held at Brisbane Immigration Transit Accommodation. His visa has been cancelled under Section 116 and faces being shipped back to New Zealand, where he has no immediate family or support, and he would leave his partner and child behind.
They have a 2-year-old son who is Australian born, and he's an Australian citizen, and again, for him to be sent back to New Zealand and not be a part of his son and his partner's life it's very stressful.
Ahead of the election, Crystal was optimistic a Labour-led government would push hard for that policy to be changed.
For New Zealand citizens living in Australia, it was actually really great to have somebody like the Labour Party care and be vocal leading up to the elections. And since the election, has been won and Labour is in power, they have come over here and had meetings with the Australian government, but it's gone nowhere. We have really no one to represent us. We are really looking towards the New Zealand government to step up and represent on a much more stronger level.
So what does the government say about this? What you've heard earlier from Andrew Little is just some of the many public statements he and other government ministers have made in their first year or so in power. Here's Winston Peters also speaking to the ABC last July.
The reality is we want New Zealanders to get the same treatment an Aussie would get if they were being charged with an offence. That is a trial before you're booted offshore. And more importantly, not being told that you can appeal from offshore back to Australia. Who can afford that? Look at the legal costs and everything that's involved. We just want a bit more fairness. We want the Aussies to behave the way we think Aussies ordinarily do behave.
Andrew Little also met with Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton at a security conference last August to discuss his concerns. It was also talked about in February this year, in a meeting between the New Zealand and Australian Prime Ministers. But what has come out of these discussions? It wasn't even brought up in a meeting between Foreign Minister Winston Peters and his Australian equivalent Maurice Payne just last Friday, even though Mr Peters said the government hadn't given up.
No, we haven't given up. But, I mean, the point is that we have to begin on the basis that Australia has got, as we have, every right to write its own domestic policy. That said, of course we're going to keep on focused to get a far better understanding and what we would believe is a far fairer legal outcome, particularly when people arrived in Australia when they were 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 years of age. If they're arriving at 18, 19 years of age, it's a different story. So, yes, we're going to keep that dialogue up, but sometimes there are a whole lot of other subjects that have to be discussed, and we had quite a long discussion.
Jacinda Ardern will visit Australia later this week, where she'll meet with Prime Minister Scott Morrison. It's not known if this issue will be brought up. In the meantime, many Aussie-based New Zealanders will live wondering if or when Australian immigration will knock on their door. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
We did want to find out from the government what action is or will be taken. We approached our Justice Minister Andrew Little to comment as part of that story from Logan, but he declined. It is 11 minutes away from 6. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National and I'm Lisa Owen. Let us know what you think about the issue of deportees. Does our government need to push back harder against those Aussie rules, or is it, well, Australia's prerogative to send back people it doesn't want? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anorexia is seen as a psychiatric disease, but a new study shows that the origins of the eating disorder are in both the mind and the body. Doctors at King's College London have showed changes hardwired into some people's DNA, changed the way they processed fats and sugars, and may make it easier to trigger the eating disorder. Here's the BBC's Health and Science correspondent, James Gallagher.
Anorexia is an eating disorder that leads people to lose as much weight as possible by eating little food and sometimes exercising excessively. For the past few decades, it's been seen as a serious psychiatric disease. But this study in Nature Genetics suggests its origins are even more complex. Researchers analysed DNA, the blueprint for the human body, from more than 72,000 people. They found mutations that were far more common in anorexia patients. Some mutations did affect brain function, but others were found in the instructions that control the body's metabolism, particularly around blood sugar levels and body fat. Professor Janet Treasure from King's College London says the study changes how the disease is seen.
It's very significant because there's been difficulty knowing exactly what sort of disorder anorexia is, and there's been swings in our understanding. And now we know that it's a complex mixture of both aspects from the body and from the mind that interact and cause this complex disorder.
When most people lose weight, there are signals in the body that push back, making us want to eat more. The suspicion is this process goes awry in people at risk of anorexia, making it easier for them to starve themselves. The eating disorder charity Beat said the findings were groundbreaking and that rethinking the origins of anorexia could fuel research into new treatments.
And that's James Gallagher with that report. A mother and son have described the moment they were attacked in a violent dairy robbery in central Auckland last year. Geeta Patel and her son Siddhartha were stabbed while minding their family business, the Highlight Dairy in Grey Lynn. An Otahuhu man is on trial in the High Court at Auckland this week, accused of being a lookout while a teenager entered the store with a large kitchen knife. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, has been following the case, and she filed this report. And just a warning, if you're watching, some of the photographs are graphic.
The 19th of June 2018 started off like any other Tuesday for the Patel family. Geeta was cooking dinner out the back of their family dairy in Grey Lynn while her son Siddhartha looked after the store. Speaking through an interpreter, she told the court she knew something was wrong when she heard her son scream. These are her words, but not her voice.
I saw that man very, very close to my son. And then I just sort of ran towards them, but I fell on the way.
Mrs. Patel fell a second time, breaking her shoulder. She told Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey when she tried to pull the attacker off her son, the knife was turned on her.
I remember this much, that I had fallen, and I don't really remember him at what time he stabbed me.
When did you know you'd been stabbed?
I found out about it the next day when the doctors told me.
Renak Lodia, a family friend of the Patels, arrived at the scene within seconds. He'd been with Geeta, who he calls Auntie, in the kitchen and chased the attacker out of the dairy.
That's when I saw in his hand he had knife and blood and stuff, and then my auntie was screaming at the back, so I didn't pay attention to him. I just went quickly inside to help my auntie.
Mr. Lodia said that's when he realised Siddhartha was badly injured.
I saw he was bleeding. I can see the blood coming out of his t-shirt and pants, and then he lifted his t-shirt up, and we saw he was injured very badly, so I was pressing the t-shirt against his wounds.
Siddhartha was stabbed 6 times, his diaphragm was pierced, his colon punctured and his lung collapsed. It's the Crown's case that Ngā Tama Kai Inawa acted as a lookout, while a teenager, who can't be named, entered the store with a large kitchen knife. Mr. Kai Inawa is on trial in the High Court at Auckland this week after pleading not guilty to aggravated wounding and assault with intent to rob. This afternoon, the court watched a police interview recorded 6 days after the stabbing, where the 28-year-old denies any involvement. Yesterday, his lawyer Shane Tate told the court his client had no idea the teenager, who was before the youth court, was carrying a knife that night. The judge-alone trial before Justice Galt is set down for 1 week. Atu iti ko te mātua ko Annika Smith-Aho.
To the US now, Donald Trump says they love America's enemies, and if they aren't happy, then they should leave. Mr. Trump wasn't specific, but he told the 4 congresswomen to go back to the country they came from. For 3 out of the 4, that country is the US. The 4th came to the US as a 12-year-old refugee. Now, the 4 US congresswomen he's believed to have had in mind have hit back, accusing him of human rights abuses, racism and xenophobia, and of running the most corrupt administration in history. They held a joint press conference in Washington today. The BBC's Aleem Maqbool was there.
Donald Trump told the congresswomen, none of whom is white, to, in his words, go back and help fix the broken and crime-infested places from which they came. In front of supporters on the South Lawn of the White House, he was clearly unrepentant.
If you're not happy here, then you can leave. As far as I'm concerned, if you hate our country, if you're not happy here, you can leave. And that's what I say all the time. That's what I said in a tweet, which I guess some people think is controversial. A lot of people love it, by the way.
The 4 women who were targets of the president's attacks, 3 of whom were born in the US, responded in a news conference, including Ayanna Pressley, who's African-American.
We are grateful for your solidarity, your encouragement, and your support in the face of the most recent xenophobic, bigoted remarks from the occupant of our White House.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said his remarks have been extremely damaging for so many Americans.
The first note that I want to tell children across this country is that no matter what the president says, this country belongs to you. Mm-hmm. And it belongs to everyone. And today, that very notion was challenged.
Ilhan Omar, who fled war in Somalia and arrived in the US in 1992, was quite obviously infuriated.
This is the agenda of white nationalists. Whether it is happening in chat rooms or it's happening on national TV, and now it's reached the White House garden.
The president wrongly stated Congresswoman Omar had previously praised Al-Qaeda.
It's beyond time to ask Muslims to condemn terrorists. We are no longer going to allow the dignification of such ridiculous statement.
Republicans have been slow to distance themselves from the president's racist rhetoric, and it's been a persistent dilemma for the party as to whether it speaks out, but then risks alienating itself from Trump's base, the reason the party's in power.
And that's Arlene Muckbull reporting from Washington. Some time for your feedback now. This is specifically on Baldwin Street, no longer being the steepest street in the world. I'm loving your fighting spirit and ingenuity, so do keep it coming. This one in, hi Radio New Zealand, right back at you. This is about Baldwin Street, the texter says. It seems like such a minute difference of steepness between these two streets. Surely we can just add some asphalt and tar and increase the gradient of Baldwin Street to resume the title as the steepest. Genius. I look forward to someone pushing that through. And Jeff has been in touch to say Baldwin Street is an opportunity. How about a joint tourism venture with Wales? Steepest in the northern and southern hemispheres. Organised tours to both, says Jeff. Gillian says it may not be the world's steepest street, Baldwin Street, but it is the world's steepest, straightest street. Ooh, are we getting a bit desperate there? And would make it more formidable, says Gillian. Jim says, I bet you cannot roll Jaffas down the Welsh Street. Good point, Jim. Who would want a steep street that you can't roll Jaffas down? And this one, the Welsh Street isn't in the same league as Baldwin Street. Baldwin Street is an urban street with tightly engineered sections. The Welsh Street is a country lane with a few houses on it and doesn't constitute a street, says this person. In which case, you could take a goat track up Everest and call it the world's steepest street.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Whakatane Mayor says not everyone will be happy with the offer that will be made to residents of a Bay of Plenty beach settlement at risk from potentially deadly debris flows. In 2005, a torrential downpour washed boulders, logs and other debris down a flooded river, destroying 27 homes in Matata. Since then, the town's future has been in doubt. The Mayor, Tony Bond, told Checkpoint the District Council has been working on the proposal for a very long time.
I can guarantee you that some will be happy and some will be still very sad. So this has been a very stressful time for them. And I can tell you, some people, over the 14 years, some people have actually passed away. They haven't actually made it. There's been a lot of stress.
It's understood a joint offer will be made at a closed meeting now underway, with monies to come from the district and regional councils and the government. The Interim Climate Change Commission is proposing farmers pay a processor levy while a fair system is developed to price agriculture emissions. The government has released a discussion document on bringing the agriculture sector into the emissions trading scheme by 2025. The chair, David Prentice, says the technology to effectively measure on-farm emissions still needs to be developed. He says the Commission wants a staged process over the next 5 years to price emissions at a processor level through the ETS.
And what this does is it provides policy certainty and sends clear investment signals. And importantly, this would also generate around $50 million per year that can be used to advance innovation by providing farmers with the practical information and support needed to reduce emissions.
David Prentice says this is important because farmers are looking to address environmental factors while also running profitable businesses. US lawmakers have introduced a resolution condemning the President Donald Trump's tweets targeting 4 congresswomen of colour as racist. He called on the women, who are all American citizens, to go back to where they came from. Our correspondent, Kate Fisher, reports.
Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib have dismissed President Trump's remarks as a distraction and urged the American people not to take the bait. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York says Mr. Trump is using race to divide America.
Weak minds and leaders challenge loyalty to our country in order to avoid challenging and debating the policy.
President Trump has defended his comments and denied allegations of racism. Kate Fisher, Washington.
Stranded Cook Strait ferry passengers have been offered a refund or a rescheduled sailing after a Bluebridge ferry clipped its Picton berth docking early this morning. 4 Bluebridge sailings departing from Picton and Wellington this afternoon have been cancelled. Inter-Islander services aren't affected. Port Marlborough's Chief Executive Rhys Wellborn says a damage assessment is still being done, but repairs are expected to take 3 days.
We're working with both ferry companies to make sure that there is minimal disruption to those schedules ongoing. and our repair teams are working hard to get the infrastructure fixed as quickly as possible.
Rhys Wellington says in the meantime one of the Blue Bridge ferries has an alternative berth. A boil water notice in Ohakune might stay in force until next week if the rain doesn't stop. The notice was issued last night after 3 days of rain overwhelmed the town's water treatment plant. Paul Wheatcroft from Ruapehu District Council says it could be a while before things get back to normal.
It could well be next week before we can lift that notice. There is more bad weather forecast, unfortunately. So this scenario is unlikely to change. And we won't be able to start replenishing the reservoirs for a couple of days yet.
Water used for food preparation and teeth brushing in Ohakune, which is busy with school holiday visitors, must be boiled for at least 2 minutes. A person has been seriously injured in South Auckland after trying to flee the police. Just after 2 this afternoon, officers tried to stop a car in Mangere. The police say the driver pulled over but then drove off at speed as officers approached. The car crashed into a nearby traffic island and a power box which caught on fire. The driver was taken to hospital with serious injuries and the passenger received minor injuries. Dunedin businesses which capitalised on Baldwin Street's moniker of the world's steepest street are nervous now that the title has been claimed by Fourth Penglech in Wales. The 1,000-year-old road in the Welsh seaside resort of Harlech was officially awarded the title by Guinness World Records this morning. Businesses near Baldwin Street told RNZ News they're concerned about what it will mean for the tourist market in Dunedin's North End. But Enterprise Dunedin's director, John Christie, says he expects the effects to take years before they are felt, if at all.
I do think we'll still see quite a number of visitors that will go to Baldwin Street, so those residents might be thinking that this is going to stop all of that traffic and all of that interference from visitors. Probably won't see that will eventuate for some time yet, if ever.
John Christie says very few visitors came to the city just for Baldwin Street, so the effect on the wider tourist market will be negligible. It's 6:05. Australia are at the forefront of the Silver Ferns thinking at the Netball World Cup. New Zealand will play Minnows Northern Ireland in their 5th game of the tournament tonight, 48 hours before a final round-robin meeting with the reigning world champions. Silver Ferns coach Nolene Dorua already has one eye on the Trans-Tasman matchup.
We're preparing, we probably think, as well for Australia. So it's the balance of, not getting too far ahead, but using the opportunity to know that we will be more than likely meeting Australia in a couple of days.
Nolene Dorua. New Zealand, Australia, England and South Africa are the only unbeaten teams. The National Basketball League is to carry out a review of the Super City Rangers after the league's board met to discuss the Auckland team's future. The Rangers ended the season with heavy losses to the Canterbury Rams and Wellington Saints after their 3 imports walked out, claiming they hadn't been paid. The NBL's General Manager Justin Nelson says it's clear the model they have in Auckland isn't working, and he expects the review to confirm that. The former all-white Tyler Boyd has signed for Turkish giants Beşiktaş. Boyd, who played for New Zealand 6 times, has recently changed allegiance to the United States. He signed a 4-year deal with Beşiktaş, who will also play in the Europa League next season. Boyd was on loan to a Turkish club last season. And Britain's defending champion Geraint Thomas moved up to 2nd in the Tour de France. He sits 1 minute 12 seconds behind the overall leader, Frenchman Julien Alaphilippe. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a song crush with a capital P, part 2 of our window on the world of superlinguists. This week's After Dinner speaker, our mainly Marxist historian Brian Roper, joins me in the Dunedin studio to discuss the government's plan to wean the nation off fossil fuel. Too much reliance on the free market, Brian says. And because I'm in Otago, lots of great music from the Edinburgh of the South. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Horowhenua, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Showers, possibly squally and thundery tomorrow. Gisborne, rain clearing tonight, then mainly fine. Hawke's Bay becoming fine this evening. Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Waidat Upper. Occasional showers clearing early tomorrow but returning to the south tomorrow evening. For Marlborough and Nelson, showers becoming confined to western Nelson early tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, rain or showers, squally and possibly thundery for this evening. Showers easing tomorrow afternoon and clearing from southwestland. For Canterbury, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine tonight, but a few showers about Fiordland and coastal Southland. Showers everywhere tomorrow, becoming confined to Fiordland in the evening. Chatham Islands, rain developing tonight, heavy at times, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. You're listening to RNZ National, and Dara Stewart is back at 5 a.m. with First Up, followed by Kim Hill joining Corin Dan on Morning Report. It's now 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. And right now, you're with Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. Environmental groups are describing proposed plans to force farmers to pay for their agricultural emissions as woefully inadequate. The Interim Climate Change Committee today released a report recommending farmers be included in the emissions trading scheme by 2025, with several options about how that could happen. One option included allowing farmers a 95% discount on their emissions. That's despite agriculture making up nearly half of New Zealand's total greenhouse gas emissions. Joining me now to discuss the proposal is Forest and Birds spokesman Jeff Key. Hi, Jeff. 5%.
Hello.
Hi, 5%. Well, you've got to start somewhere, don't you? And isn't it better to have them in than out?
Well, I mean, it's obviously a good thing that they've finally accepted that climate change is something they need to be concerned about, and we're no longer hearing the Federated Farmers Lobby telling the country that climate change wasn't anything to worry about. But, I mean, you know, we're talking about 1 cent for every $6 of payout here, so it's not going to make really any difference.
And, well, you mentioned in real terms there, so what other examples have you got? Is it in terms of beef? What would it amount to?
So, it was 1 cent per kilogram of beef. So, you know, if you think about your rump steak, that, you know, 150 gram steak is going to be a fraction of a cent on that. You know, we're talking about very, very small numbers here, mostly because of this 95% subsidy.
But that was already outlined in the coalition deal, right? So this can't be a surprise to you. Did you really expect them to sort of cast aside the agreement that they'd made with New Zealand First and do something completely different?
I mean, it wasn't a surprise. That doesn't mean that level of subsidy is acceptable. You know, if we're talking about a landowner who, say, runs cows but also has a forestry block, they will get 100% of the credits for the forestry block and pay 5% of the cost of their emissions from the dairy block. It's just a double standard.
So, what you say, it won't really have any impact on farmers in terms of reducing their emissions. Why do you say that?
It's just hard to see how 1 cent on a $6 payout for dairy could actually cause anyone to really change their behaviour. I mean, we think about the changes, the fluctuations in the dairy payouts. It changes in order of dollars, you know, between years. So, you know, this 1 cent for every $6 of payout is nothing really.
So do you think do you think they need to be hurt financially in order to get them to change their ways? Is that the only way?
Well, it's not really a case about hurting someone financially, but you want to have enough of a price that when they look at their balance sheet that year, they've got an incentive to change. The whole point to having a price on your emissions is to create an incentive for people to do things differently and to innovate. If it's not big enough to enable that to happen, it's actually not much point.
So how much, in your view, is big enough to make that change happen? What's a reasonable figure?
I think you'd need to get a farm economist in to do those numbers. But certainly what we're looking at sort of that 1 cent and the $6 doesn't seem to be enough. That just doesn't seem plausible that would be enough.
So ballpark, though, you must have an idea. If you don't like 5%, do you like 10% better, 15, 20, 25? Whereabouts do you think it should lie?
Well, as I said, let's get some economists in and actually look at it properly. Let's see at what level farmers might want to change their behaviour. It's not something you can easily do, you know, by pulling a figure out of the air, which is why I'm a bit reluctant to do it. You know, we should be doing this sort of stuff properly.
But this is a climate change committee. Presumably they would argue they have done it properly.
Well, this is a government proposal. So the Climate Change Committee has had a look at various ways that the industry could cut their emissions. And we have to remember that for dairy farming, a number of farms can actually cut their emissions probably sort of 5 to 10% and for it to be profitable. So there's a farm out at Lincoln University where they've been modelling more efficient farming, and they cut their herd size and their profits went up. So, you know, there's a lot that farmers can actually start doing now, but we're not seeing that.
So using that example you've just used then, I'm assuming that you don't buy into the argument that comes from some farmers that says that basically you'll take their competitive edge away from them if you do this too quickly, that there's not the technology available right now for the level of change that some people might want, and that they are some of the most efficient farmers in the world. Are those not fair arguments?
I mean, for starters, they're not just competing with other dairy farmers or sheep farmers. You know, they're also competing with non-meat products these days. You know, more people are sort of going for those meatless meals, and I think they need to be ahead of the game because they're not just competing with other farming producers. The other thing is, I just can't see how 1 cent in $6 is going to alter anybody's competitive edge when the price for dairy payouts fluctuates sort of, you know, $4 one year and $6 another. It's a really tiny sum. I mean, you know, fuel costs fluctuate more than that. You know, it is a really, really small proportion of the operating cost.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Jeff Key from Forrester Bird, who's not at all happy with that 5% of emissions that potentially farmers will have to pay as part of the ETS. Let's go to the Bay of Plenty now, where we have the latest in a lengthy battle by Matata residents to protect their beachside homes. It's a case study which could have wide-ranging implications for thousands of households at risk of coastal erosion all around the country. 14 years ago, a torrential downpour washed a massive amount of debris into homes in the small beachside town, destroying properties and racking up a bill of $20 million. After the damage was repaired, the Whakatane District Council told homeowners that they could return, but they later backtracked, saying it was unsafe and they couldn't mitigate the risk. They then went on to declare 34 properties there unlivable and proposed paying owners to move out. But residents say they were lowballed and told if they didn't leave their properties, they could be rezoned by the council to force them off their land. Our reporter Andrew McRae is outside a meeting in Matata tonight where residents are finally going to hear what's on the table from the district and regional councils as well as central government. Hi Andrew, what can you tell us about what's happening there?
Good evening, Lisa. Well, around about 30 residents from Matata, from the northern end of the town, which was devastated 14 years ago, they've gone to a meeting here at the Catholic Church, and a number of council representatives, including the mayor and the CEO, are also at the meeting. It started dead on 5:30, and 45 minutes later, no sign of anyone coming out yet. So they're obviously intent on listening to what the council has to offer in terms of the deal that it seems like is going to be divided between the district, regional and central government paying the bill, but just what the residents are hoping for. They are pretty well, you know, some of them are split on what they want. Some want a good market value for their properties so they can get out and go somewhere else. Others want to stay and say they're not going to leave. They have to be carried out and they'll fight it in the courts if they have to. So really it's a waiting game. The council are hoping that they will satisfy the most of the residents' demands. It's going to be, take some time before the news filters through to those who are not at the meeting. The council decided not to make any comment publicly until they've told the residents, which of course is fair enough. And the Whakatane District Council is holding a media conference early tomorrow morning with media just to spell out what the deal is. So we're just still waiting to see. But when some of the residents come out, hopefully we can get a steer from them within the next hour, hopefully.
Andrew, I don't know if you got an opportunity to talk to any of those residents as they kind of wafted into the meeting, but I'm just wondering how hopeful they were for a resolution, because it's been a pretty fractious 14 odd years, hasn't it?
You're right, Lisa, and it's hard to imagine how something like this could drag on for so long. And the residents are really just sick and tired of the indecision and the uncertainty, really, not knowing what their future holds. Because if they have to move, they want a good market value for their property, so they can buy something similar either nearby or another part of this town or further in the Bay of Plenty. And others who want to stay, well, they just want to stay there, and they just don't want the council interfering. And because the council does say there's a risk of further debris flows. And if you look at the pictures going back to 2005, and I remember coming over, covering the story at the time, and the actual devastation caused by a flooding stream, which is just a little creek coming through the hills, but debris built up, and then it came down in a massive flow in the middle of the night, and it caused so much devastation. And there's that risk of it happening again, and the council don't want to be liable, I guess, so they really are going to have to make sure that everyone basically leaves that particular area. And just interesting, the press conference tomorrow at the council, they've titled it Managed Retreat Process. So they obviously are going to make sure are going to want everyone out of that particular northern end of town. So that's going to cause some unease with the residents, particularly those who want to stay. And, as I said before, some are threatening to fight it in court.
Yeah, the title's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? That is Andrew McRae there, who is in Matata, where the residents are at a meeting with the council about a possible buyout. And we'll bring you any updates that come through the show, and also just keep an eye on the news. Andrew will be there until there is an outcome. It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Surgeons at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London have successfully separated twin girls who were born joined at the head. The girls, Safa and Marwa, are 2-year-olds from Pakistan and underwent 3 separate operations which lasted nearly 50 hours. The BBC's Fergus Walsh has been following the twins' story for the past year. He sent this report.
So we have one case for the list today. Safa and Marwa, 2 kids, 1 case.
Safa and Marwa were born joined at the top of their skull, which was one long tube. They had separate brains, but these were fused together. The surgery was complex and risky. The team at Great Ormond Street decided it would need 3 operations over several months. Professor David Dunaway is one of the lead surgeons.
Clearly, I think life being separate is better than being joined together. If we felt that there wasn't a very, very high chance that we could do it safely, we'd be thinking quite carefully about whether we should do it or not. And I think the whole team feel that there's an excellent chance of a successful separation here.
The first 2 operations in October and November, lasting a total of 35 hours, dealt with dividing the labyrinth of shared blood vessels that crisscrossed from one twin's brain to the other.
So the artery from Safa going to supply Marwa's brain has been clamped.
It took several months for the girls to recover from that, so it wasn't until February that the operation to separate them could finally go ahead.
So this is Safa's brain, that's Marwa's brain. Yeah. So the sheet should be running like this,
This took 17 hours and involved surgeons building a top to each girl's head using pieces of bone removed from the shared skull. Safa and Marwa, now separated, needed intensive physiotherapy to build their muscle strength, and it was only earlier this month that they were finally discharged from hospital. The gruelling surgery took its toll. The girls, now 2.5, are likely to have learning difficulties. But their mother told us she was delighted she could finally hold each twin separately in her arms.
Fergus Walsh reporting there. A reported case of Ebola in the crowded eastern Congolese city of Goma has been described as a game changer. Goma is a lakeside city on the border of Rwanda, and the World Health Organization says there's now a serious risk that the virus could accelerate into one of Africa's most densely populated areas. The outbreak in the DRC began in August, and at least 1,700 people have died. CNN's David McKenzie has spoken to one man who survived it and was told fear and misinformation is making the outbreak so much worse.
Ebola survivors. When Ebola latched onto Roger Wasakundi's family, denial came with it. My sister got it first, he says. We didn't want to believe it was Ebola. She stayed at home and we buried her. Through the intimacy of family, the virus spread to his aunt, his mother, father, to him. It took days to persuade them to seek treatment at a centre like this, where doctors told Roger that his father and aunt had died. So when they told me I had Ebola, he says, I thought I would die too. In medical terms, stopping the spread of Ebola should be simple. Identify patients quickly, isolate them, trace their contacts. But halting this outbreak has been anything but. The epicenter is anchored in a conflict zone, where authority often comes through violence, which breeds fear. This fear makes it difficult to stop the chain of transmission, says Sylvester Zongwe. What we needed was to break that fear. Zongwe, a health worker for French medical NGO Alima, says that in the city of Butembo, they wouldn't let outsiders in. When responders came to take the sick from their homes, he says, they didn't know who they were. They believed they would take them over there to die. That's what created resistance. Earlier this year, unknown assailants burnt down 2 treatment centres. All told, there have been more than 130 attacks on health outposts. Elima's solution: integrate an Ebola reception centre in something people already knew, an existing clinic. So we're at a centre where they receive patients who could have Ebola, but what's incredible about this, it's right inside a hospital. They negotiate with the community, they're hiring youth from the community, and this could be one of the answers. But it's still the only centre of its kind. Many victims still die in their homes, refusing to seek treatment. And survivors return to a fearful community. Many people don't believe Ebola even exists, says Roger. If people can accept this crisis, then we can end it.
And that was David McKenzie reporting from Butembo in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Back to Auckland for a moment. There are power outages in South Auckland. Apparently, a fleeing driver crashed into a power box, causing the outages. The accident happened at just after 2 this afternoon when officers tried to stop a car in Mangere. And we understand that power is still out to some areas in South Auckland. The police say that the driver pulled over but then drove off at speed as officers approached the car. And the car then crashed into a nearby traffic island and the power box, which caught on fire. Driver's been taken to hospital with serious injuries and a passenger had minor injuries. Now, Vector says that its crews are on site on Buckland Road in Mangere, where the car crashed, and it can't continue working on the damaged transformer until they have finished their work, as in the police, I believe. It says it can't confirm how many people have had their power cut while the serious crash unit is still at the scene. So that explains why the lights are out in your part of town. The Bank of England has announced that the computer pioneer and codebreaker Alan Turing will be on the new £50 note. The banknote will be the last to switch from paper to polymer when it enters circulation by the end of 2021. The BBC's Kevin Peachy reports.
Alan Turing is best known for his code-cracking work that proved vital for the Allies in the Second World War and celebrated in the award-winning film The Imitation Game. But his legacy is much greater. He was pivotal in the development of early computers and was a pioneer in artificial intelligence. The Bank of England Governor Mark Carney says he's worthy of the banknote honour.
His genius lay in a unique ability to link the philosophical and the abstract with the practical and the concrete. And all around us, his legacy continues to build. Turing is a giant on whose shoulders so many now stand.
Many of the public who nominated Turing for his place on the banknotes will hope use of his image is a signal of how much society has changed.
You're having a sexual relationship with this man?
Yes.
What sort of sexual relationship?
How many sorts are there?
His genius and his legacy were initially overshadowed, as depicted in the BBC drama Breaking the Code, by a conviction for gross indecency for a homosexual relationship. His sentence involved chemical castration. In 2013, nearly 60 years after his death, he was pardoned. His great-niece, Rachel Barnes, says his treatment was shocking, but a vital part of his story.
I think it is because he was persecuted by the government who he worked for. And I think, people sort of feel attached to him because of that reason. To think he did so much for our country, but then he was prosecuted and given these chemical injections. And I think that's possibly, why so many people do vote for him these days.
But as to how many people actually see his image on the £50 note itself, that is open to question. There are 344 million £50 notes in circulation, but it was once described as the currency of corrupt elites, of crime of all sorts and of tax evasion. Despite this and the falling use of cash, the government chose to keep the banknote in production.
And that was Kevin Peachy with that report. Some time for some of your feedback now. Baldwin Street, the theft of the title of the steepest street in the world has really got people's goat up. This person says, sounds like we need a Jaffa emoji for Baldwin Street. I vote for that. Send it to us so that we can check it out. And Paul says, it's like the cricket. They should both enjoy the trophy. We wish, Paul. Paul says, Baldwin, the steepest street, Welsh one, the steepest lane. I love the fact that nobody is attempting to spell the name of this street in Wales. And on the issue of Kiwi deportees, Kiwis sent back from Australia on character grounds or the fact that they have convictions. This one from Jeremy. Tēnā koe, time to send Australia annual bills to cover the total cost of rehab and resettlement for each deportee based on how difficult and extensive that rehab is, with penalty interest on late payments, and take the matter to the World Court, says Jeremy. On the other hand, Simon says these are undesirable citizens. I don't blame Australia for rejecting them on a technicality. We just need to cope with them. New Zealand should probably reciprocate for serious, not minor offenders, says Simon. Now, thanks for all your feedback. Don't forget you can go back online and check out that story about Baldwin Street, see the pictures there, and also the wombling penguins. Why wouldn't you want to look at them?
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Whakatane Mayor says not everyone will be happy with tonight's offers being made to residents of a Bay of Plenty beach settlement at risk of deadly debris flows. The Interim Climate Change Commission wants farmers to start paying a levy while a fair system is developed to price agriculture emissions into the emissions trading scheme. A boil water notice in Ohakune might stay in force until next week after heavy rain overwhelmed the town's water treatment plant. And US lawmakers have introduced a resolution condemning the President Donald Trump's tweets targeting 4 Congresswomen of colour as racist. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
They've done a good job for some children, but certainly not for Māori children.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
It does mean you have to get creative at times, so thankfully I have a creative wife.
Live with local, national and